Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. So we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, the Washington Commanders have released quarterback Carson Wentz. I'm going to go over what I think about the decision of the Washington Commanders to release Carson Wentz and what I think the future for Carson Wentz will be. Now, obviously, a lot of people remember that Carson Wentz was a former top draft pick. Even though he played at a small school in North Dakota State, he was the second pick in the draft in 2016 because he had great size at 6'5", 237 pounds, and he had a lot of success at North Dakota State, displaying a lot of talent even though he was at a small school, and he won a lot of games, including championships with the Bison. And if you look at his college statistics at North Dakota State, his first two seasons he came off the bench and he wasn't a starter, but his last two seasons in 2014, he was 228 at 358 for 3,111 yards, 25 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. He played really well that season. And in 2015, he was 130 for 208 for 1,651 yards, 17 touchdowns, and 4 interceptions. In both seasons, he ran for 6 touchdowns, but as you can see in the 2015 season, he didn't play the full season because he suffered a broken wrist, and that's been the big problem for Carson Wentz, even dating all the way back to his college days, is that he's been an injury-prone player. He has not been able to escape the injury bug, and he hasn't been able to play full seasons for most of the teams that he's played for, and that's been the biggest problem for him because he does have a lot of talent, or he wouldn't have been drafted second overall in the NFL draft in 2016, but he can't stay healthy, and unfortunately, availability is the best ability. And if you're not available, then a lot of teams don't want you as your quarterback because they're going to want a quarterback that's going to be able to play for the team the full season. And if you look at Carson Wentz stats at the Philadelphia Eagles, the team that drafted him, the first season that he was the quarterback for the Eagles, he did play all 16 games, and they went 7-9, and he was 379 for 607 for 3,782 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions, and he had 2 rushing touchdowns. And that was not a bad debut for the Philadelphia Eagles for Carson Wentz because the Eagles weren't the best team in the world, and he did have a solid season, even though he did have a high number of interceptions. But in 2017, it showed what Carson Wentz could be. He only played 13 games, and he was hurt some of that season as well, which is, again, part of the problem of why he's had struggles in the NFL. But he led the Philadelphia Eagles to an 11-2 record that season, and that was the year the Eagles did win the Super Bowl with Nick Foles, so they had a really good team. But still, Carson Wentz led him to an 11-2 record, and he was 265 for 440 for 3,296 yards, 33 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. He did not have a rushing touchdown, but he ran for 299 yards. And overall, that was his best season by far in the NFL, and the Eagles had a great team that year. But Carson Wentz showcased his ability, what he could be, if he could stay healthy at the quarterback position. But he got hurt that season and was not even able to lead the Eagles to the Super Bowl. Nick Foles got the Super Bowl win, but Carson Wentz had a great year. But then in 2018, he only played 11 games. He was hurt some more, and he led the Eagles to a 5-6 record when he played, and he was 279 for 401 for 3,074 yards, 21 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And he still had a really solid season. He didn't have a lot of picks, and his numbers were pretty solid when he played, but the Eagles didn't have a great record, and he still suffered more injuries. And then in 2019, he led the Eagles to a 9-7 record, and he did play all 16 games again, and he was 388 for 607 for 4,039 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And that was a pretty solid season as well. He's not the most turnover-prone quarterback in the world. He's kept his interceptions fairly low throughout his career, and he has thrown for a lot of yards when he's played. But then in 2020, he was only 3-8-1 as the starting quarterback. He only played 12 games, and he was banged up. And he was only 251 for 437 for 2,620 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 15 interceptions, and 5 rushing touchdowns. And part of that was a byproduct of the Philadelphia Eagles not having a great offensive line that year, which is why he did run more, and he did have a lot more interceptions. But again, health was the key. He was not able to stay healthy. And overall, that is why the Philadelphia Eagles got rid of Carson Wentz, and they sent him out to the Indianapolis Colts. And the one year that he was the quarterback for the Colts, he did play all 17 games, and he wasn't banged up too much, and he led him to a 9-8 record. He was 322 for 516 for 3,563 yards, 27 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions, and he had a rushing touchdown. And looking at those numbers, they aren't terrible. He had a pretty solid year for the Colts, but they only went 9-8. And I think that, again, the Colts were another team that had a bad offensive line, just like the Philadelphia Eagles did toward the end of Carson Wentz's tenure. And he played solid, and he didn't get hurt that year, so it was kind of a little surprising that the Colts ended up getting rid of Carson Wentz. But I think overall, the Colts knew that Carson Wentz couldn't be the quarterback of the future for the team because of the fact they had a bad offensive line, and he probably would have gotten hurt the next year, but he did have a solid season. And then in the one year that he was the Washington Commanders quarterback, he played in 8 games, and he started 7 of them, and he went 2-5 in those games, and he was 172 for 276 for 1,755 yards, 11 touchdowns, and 9 interceptions. And he had a rushing touchdown, and overall, those numbers were way down. He wasn't protecting the ball as much. He had more picks and less time, and he wasn't throwing too many touchdowns. And then he got hurt for the Washington Commanders in the middle of this past season, and the Commanders decided to cut him in the offseason. And I think that overall for the Washington Commanders, this is probably a good decision to get rid of Carson Wentz because of the fact he has been injury prone throughout his career. He does put up solid numbers. He did put up great numbers for the Eagles in a couple of the seasons that he did not get hurt, and the team had better offensive lines those years. But I don't think the Washington Commanders are really a team that's built for Carson Wentz, especially with Eric Bieniemy now being the offensive coordinator and potentially the head coach in the future if he does well as the offensive coordinator of the Commanders. I don't think Carson Wentz is the style of quarterback that Eric Bieniemy is going to want in his offense. And I think that if Carson Wentz wasn't a quarterback that was so injury prone, then potentially Washington would have kept him. But they also have Sam Howell as the potential quarterback of the future for Washington, and they might also be able to draft a quarterback in the future or be able to trade for a quarterback because Carson Wentz isn't on the team. But again, I think that for the Washington Commanders, getting rid of Carson Wentz is a good decision because of the fact that even though he's had some success in the NFL, it hasn't been very consistent, and he's been a very injury-prone quarterback. And Washington needs to move forward with Eric Bieniemy an offensive coordinator and have the quarterback that he wants in his system. Now, for Carson Wentz, is this it for him? Is he not going to be in the NFL anymore? And is his football playing days over? I don't think so. I think Carson Wentz, he's had a lot of injuries, but he's still a fairly young quarterback. He just turned 30 years old, and I think that he could still have a few good seasons left in the NFL because of the fact he has shown the potential when he's healthy of being a great quarterback. And there are still NFL teams that need quarterbacks as of this time, and one of these teams could take a chance on Carson Wentz, but they need to be a team that has a good offensive line to be able to protect him so he won't get hurt, because that has been his biggest issue in the NFL. And he could go to the XFL or the USFL if he wanted to and be able to reset and potentially get his confidence back to be able to be back in the NFL. I don't know if he'd want to go that route. I still think Carson Wentz is a good enough quarterback that shouldn't have to play in either of those leagues. And it's also going to be whether Carson Wentz wants a guaranteed starting spot as well. If he's not guaranteed a starting quarterback job, Carson Wentz could just retire and call it a day and not play in the NFL anymore because he's had a lot of success. He's already made a good amount of money in the NFL, so he doesn't really have to play anymore. But I think if a team wants to take a chance on Carson Wentz and give him another shot to be able to stay healthy and be able to provide veteran quarterback play for a team in the NFL, then I think that Carson Wentz should stay in the NFL. And I do think that some team will pick him up because I don't think that he's washed up yet. I think he still has a few good years left in him. And if a team gives him a chance to be able to be their starting quarterback and they can keep him upright and be able to make sure that he doesn't get injured, then I think that Carson Wentz could stay in the NFL a little bit longer. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens with Carson Wentz, whether he retires or whether another team in the NFL picks him up or he decides to go to the XFL or USFL. I do think that a team will pick him up, but we'll just have to wait and see. But I do think that the Washington Commanders made a good decision to get rid of Carson Wentz because of the fact he didn't really work in their quarterback plans for their future. And if Carson Wentz does get signed by another NFL team, then this decision will end up benefiting the Washington Commanders and Carson Wentz. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Comment down below what you think about the Washington Commanders cutting Carson Wentz and whether you think Carson Wentz will get signed by another NFL team or he'll retire. And I will see you next time.